Hey guys, in this video, we are talking about why fearful avoidants cheat in relationships. This is part of a 3-part series where I've gone through each of anxious, dismissive avoidant and fearful avoidant attachment, looking at the very delicate topic of cheating in relationships, which, while I know is a really hard thing to talk about and it's easy to just reach for blame and villainization, in my mind, it's really important that we can de-shame the conversation around infidelity, and not as a way to excuse or condone cheating as a behavior, which obviously causes immense pain, but simply to engage with the reality of the situation, which is that people are experiencing something, there is something going on with them, that there are certain conditions, both relationally and internally within someone, that lead up to cheating. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about fearful avoidance, specifically the circumstances in which they might cheat and, what's likely to be going on for them in the lead up to that and the aftermath of it, and what the growth edge is for someone with fearful avoidant attachment, particularly if this is a pattern. You've done this several times. You often end up self-sabotaging in this way in relationships. The things that you can focus on to maybe forge a healthier path for yourself when it comes to relationships. For those who don't know me, my name is Stephanie Rigg. I'm a relationship coach and host of the On Attachment podcast, which is the world's leading podcast on attachment theory and how attachment styles shape the way we live and love. And I have over 200 podcast episodes that you can go back and binge listen to if you're wanting to go deeper into all of this stuff. Okay, so let's talk about fearful avoidant attachment and the circumstances in which someone with fearful avoidant patterns might cheat in their relationships. So, as is often the case, the fearful avoidant picture is kind of a hybrid of the anxious picture and the dismissive avoidant picture, but with some unique traits and characteristics. So I think the defining feature of fearful avoidant attachment when it comes to cheating is this element of self-sabotage and destructiveness. So oftentimes the fearful avoidant, as a relationship is maybe getting more serious, or maybe there's been some tension or stress, is they experience so much internal chaos and anxiety and this sense of overwhelm and feeling incredibly out of control. And because that feeling is so immense and so all-consuming for them, they're much more likely to engage in impulsive, reactive behaviours when they're in that state, particularly off the back of, say, a big conflict with their partner. If they've had a big blow up and then they sort of storm out and disappear for a few days, that might be a headspace in which they could go on a bit of a kind of destructive path, not necessarily cheating. And certainly if you're watching this as the partner of someone with fearful avoidant attachment, I don't want you to convince yourself that anytime you've had space, your partner's gone off and cheated on you. But I think that sort of setup is one where someone with fearful avoidant attachment might be more likely to just act out and be in the mindset of, like, fuck it, I'm just going to blow everything up. It doesn't matter anyway. It's all gone to shit. I might as well just do what I want. And that can be coming from a few different places. So there's certainly a part of the fearful avoidant who doesn't want to be controlled. And certainly when they're feeling triggered, they can have a strong fight instinct and an assertiveness of their selfhood that says, like, I won't be controlled. I'll do what I want, almost in this like defiant way. So I think that can come out and can manifest in all sorts of destructive behaviors when they're in that headspace, when they're in that state, and that might lead to infidelity. I think another part that I've spoken about in other videos around the fearful avoidant is that they have a really strong shame imprint and this sense of, like, I'm bad, I'm broken, I ruin everything, I'm terrible at relationships. And from that place, they can play out this identity of being the villain that they sort of place themselves in. And so cheating feels like the ultimate way of confirming their badness, which sounds really dark and frankly really sad. But I think that can often be part of the thing for fearful avoidance is, like, I'm broken anyway, I might as well just really blow things up. So there is this strong sense of self-sabotage and self-destruction that can be there for fearful avoidance. In terms of, who they're likely to cheat with, now, of course, massive generalizations, but what you might see for the fearful avoidant is Whereas the anxious person will almost always cheat with someone they've developed an emotional bond with. The likelihood of them just randomly hooking up with someone is very low. Whereas the dismissive avoidant is much more likely to randomly or opportunistically hook up with someone or have some sort of casual encounter on the side. The fearful avoidant can kind of go both ways there. Again, if they're in this like big, almost like a self-destructive bender, not necessarily involving drugs or alcohol, although that could be a factor for sure, they might just take an opportunity. They might just feel a spark with someone that they meet at a bar. But likewise, they might actually seek out, some past flame, or they might message someone inappropriately, or, things like that. I think they can kind of go both ways. It might be calling on someone that they've had a previous bond with or an attraction to, and knowing that that person's kind of notionally available for them to act out in that way with, or it could be more opportunistic. I mean, obviously it doesn't really matter, particularly if you're on the other side of it, who or why they did that. It's still hugely painful, but just for the sake of the discussion, I think it can kind of go either way, and that's a point of difference from anxious folks and dismissive avoidant folks who tend to more go one way or the other. I think the really important point to drive home when it comes to fearful avoidance and cheating is that it is not about desire for someone else. It's not even really about their partner. It's about the intense state of emotional disarray that they are in, and the fact that sometimes chaos for them is the antidote, and that doing something so destructive where at least they feel like they're in control and they're in the driver's seat rather than that the chaos is happening to them, that can allow them to feel powerful at a time when they're otherwise feeling totally powerless. And particularly if they've got this story of like, I'm so bad at relationships, I can just hit the kill switch by doing something so extreme and so hurtful that allows them to, again, feel like they're back in the seat of control at a time when they're otherwise feeling really out of control. The other defining feature of fearful avoidance is that they struggle with a lot of guilt and shame generally, but particularly in the aftermath of this. And because they can get into these states where they're so dysregulated and impulsive and reactive and doing and maybe engaging in these destructive behaviors, they almost have a come down where they are forced to reckon with what they've done. And because they have such a high shame baseline, they can really struggle immensely with shame and even, self-loathing off the back of cheating. And that can lead them to spiral even more in terms of their own relationship with themselves. And they might, in that state, they might confess to their partner or they might pull away further. It really depends on the circumstances and the relationship and maybe how invested they are in trying to salvage the relationship. But certainly the fearful avoidant is much more likely to feel deep shame and guilt and a sense of, what have I done? I'm such an idiot after cheating, compared with, say, the dismissive avoidant, who is more likely to compartmentalize and have a mentality of, what they don't know can't hurt them. Okay, so if this is you, if you are someone with fearful avoidant patterns and you know that this is something that you have struggled with historically, maybe you've struggled with recently, this pattern of going into self-destruction and seeking that feeling of being in control, of feeling alive, or whatever else you might be reaching for in those moments. One of the big growth edges for you is nervous system regulation, because cheating tends to take place in moments of extreme dysregulation for fearful avoidance. Learning how to create guardrails for yourself when you're in that state, and ideally learning to regulate earlier on in the process so you don't go to those extremes. That's a really key piece in your healing more broadly, but in the context of this discussion, in preventing that pattern from playing out. And then obviously, the broader work of shifting the cycle of shame that drives fearful avoidant attachment, whereby you've got this deep belief that you're bad, and that drives your reactivity and defensiveness and pulling away, which in turn leads to behaviors that reinforce the belief that you are bad and broken and defective and that there's no point. That's a really reliable cycle that will just keep spiraling downwards, and that will keep you in those patterns of dysfunction and self-loathing and everything else that can go along with it. So doing the broader work of healing and rewiring some of those core beliefs and changing some of the behaviors that flow from them is really, really key in shifting this along with your other relational patterns. Guys, I really hope that that's been helpful. As I said, I know it's a hard thing to talk about, but I think it's a really important thing to be able to engage with in nuanced and compassionate ways, while also obviously not excusing or condoning cheating or any other harmful behaviors in relationships that I know can cause immense pain. And I hope that this video has given you some insight and awareness no matter where you sit on that spectrum. If you've enjoyed this video, please consider liking and subscribing to my channel. That's a huge help. Otherwise, I look forward to seeing you again soon.